We get an ominous warning at the end of chapter 1132 of One Piece that Elbaf is not a place where you should stay for too long, and that this is the start of a huge adventure for the Straw Hat Pirates. I think this warning is a clever bit of foreshadowing, and that Luffy will not only go against it and stay in Elbaf for a while, but that the Elbaf arc is actually going to end up being the longest arc in all of One Piece. Outside Laugh Tale itself, Elbaf is the arc that has been set up for the longest time in the story, all the way since the island was first mentioned during Little Garden in 1999. Now that Elbaf has finally started, however, I even think the arc's 25-year build-up will be exceeded. I think Elbaf will not only be a huge lore arc that will answer some of the biggest mysteries of the One Piece world, I think it will at the same time be the most plot-heavy arc in the story. It is very likely that we will follow the trend set by Egghead Island, where we will witness huge events both inside and outside the land of the giants. Elbaf may not only be the arc where the Straw Hats will have one of their biggest adventures, it could also be when we will finally see events like Shanks vs Blackbeard, the awakening of the ancient weapons, the full God Valley flashback, and Dragon fighting the world government. When it's all said and done, I think Elbaf could more than anything be remembered for one thing: content. Everything is pointing towards Elbaf being back to the brims with more content than any prior arc, and it might very well have to be the longest arc in the story just to be able to fit all of this in. This is admittedly a lot to process, and this video will give a full breakdown of why Elbaf is such an important arc to both the overall One Piece story and to Oda himself, and all the massive events that could happen during this arc. But let's however start with something more simple. One reason why the Elbaf arc is so important to the One Piece series is something we only discovered in the previous arc of the manga, which is that Elbaf is the home of Sun God Nika. If you had told a One Piece reader 5 years ago about Nika, they would have been very confused, as Nika is a figure first mentioned as recently as 2021. In the last few years, however, the Sun God has become one of the most important aspects of the manga. Nika is not only the true form of Luffy's rubber devil fruit, it is also the mythical enemy of the world government, as Luffy's fruit was last awakened by Joy Boy when he fought against Imu over 800 years ago. While first mentioned only in the last few years, Nika has already become extremely relevant to the overall story, and is actually a linchpin that ties together much of the past and lore of the One Piece world. As Elbaf is where the Sun God originates from, this is likely the arc where we will finally discover what Nika actually is. Nika's mystery has already been built up in the arc, where the Straw Hats have already encountered multiple giants who claim themselves to be the Sun God. In particular, Loki's declaration also puts Nika in a completely different light from the warrior of liberation we'd heard about before, as Loki believes that his destiny as the Sun God is not to free the world, but to actually end it. Elbaf's connection to the lore of the One Piece world will however likely go far beyond just Nika. Ever since the Straw Hats first entered the Grand Line, we've bit by bit learned about the events of the Void Century, and how the entire story essentially revolves around this period. A lot of things are currently pointing towards the Elbaf arc being the biggest motherlode of lore on the Void Century, before Laugh Tale itself. The Giants have always resisted the world government, and thus have never suffered from their global censorship of history. The Giants also live far longer than humans, with their natural lifespans extending to hundreds of years. This could mean that the oldest giants that are currently alive are only a few generations removed from the events of the Void Century. In fact, the oldest giant that we know of is Jarl, who is 408 years old. If the giants can live for more than 400 years, this could mean that Jarl and other giants his age have literally heard stories about what happened over 800 years ago from their parents and grandparents, who would have literally been alive during the Void Century. The Elbaf arc's relevance to the ancient history, however, got even deeper than expected, after we learned during the Egghead arc that Ohara's knowledge of the Void Century still exists today and is currently on Elbaf. This means that if the Straw Hats find this knowledge on the island, they will learn some of the longest built-up mysteries in the story. We also already have some idea of what information could be kept on Elbaf. One is the name of the ancient kingdom, which the Oharan scholars had discovered years ago. This is a mystery that was first set up during Robin's flashback, and the kingdom's name is apparently so important that the five elders immediately ordered Professor Clover to be shot when he was about to say it. If this isn't big enough, another thing we will likely learn is what Vegapunk during Egghead was about to reveal about the D-Clan, before his broadcast was cut off by Saint Valkyrie. As everything Vegapunk had learned came from Elbaf, the Straw Hats will very likely discover what he was about to say in this arc, which could even be something as big as the true meaning of the Will of D itself. The giant safekeeping Ohara's knowledge also brings up another important reason why Elbaf will likely have to be a long arc. The man currently guarding this knowledge is Jaguar D Soul, and we are already being set up for him finally returning to the story and reuniting with Robin in this arc. Soul is however hardly the only long absent character who will likely return during Elbaf. Currently, Elbaf is very much shaping up to be an arc like Wano, where it will involve dozens upon dozens of characters, both new and old to the story. We've for example already seen the new giant warriors come back in this arc, and it actually turns out that Har Yudin is a far more important character than initially thought, where he is actually a prince of Elbaf and the brother of Loki. With Loki himself being set up to play a big role in this arc, it also does not seem unlikely that Lola would also return and play a role in Elbaf. For a brief recap, Loki in the past actually had a crush on Lola, but Lola spurned him. Currently, Lola is with Capone and his pirate crew, where she's actually ended up marrying Gotti, one of Capone's men. While it is not a guarantee that Lola and the Fire Tank Pirates will play a role in Elbaf, this touches on another big reason why Elbaf could end up being a really long arc. While it is hard to say which characters will return, it is safe to say that Elbaf will serve as a comeback arc for several major One Piece characters. This is simply following a trend set by the rest of the post-time skip. In every arc beginning with Return to Sabodi, we've seen characters from the prior story return and play a major role. These returns are also sometimes very unexpected. For example, I'm not sure if anyone at the start of Punk Hazard expected the mysterious warlord to end up being Trafalgar Law of all characters, or that Sabo would be revealed to be alive in Dressrosa of all places. Even though we don't know who will return during Elbaf, many characters undeniably have a lot of potential if they participated in this arc. Elbaf is the last place where we saw the Kid Pirates, when they were defeated off the coast of the island by Shanks. If they survived, Kid might actually end up playing a big role during Elbaf. When he left Wano, Kid told Luffy that it would be a fight to the death once they saw each other again. This could mean that, if the Straw Hats encountered Kid on Elbaf, things could actually turn violent. Kid is also the man who defeated Big Mom during Wano. As Big Mom is the hated enemy of Elbaf, there's even potential for a surprising alliance between Kid and the Giants. This also brings up Big Mom herself. While her status after Wano is still unconfirmed, there are already hints in the story that she actually survived. If there still is an arc in the story for her to make her comeback, it would definitely be Elbaf, considering her long history with the Giants. The Giants are also the only ones other than Strushan who know the truth about what happened to Mother Caramel, which is still a plot thread that has not been solved. Most importantly, however, Elbaf is where Luffy currently is. While it may have been somewhat forgotten, Luffy vs Big Mom is genuinely one of the most built-up fights in the story, where the two fighting each other is something that has been frequently brought up since Fishman Island. These are also just the more expected characters who would return during Elbaf, but as discussed before, it can often be very surprising which characters return in which arc. One Piece has a number of Chekhov's guns in the form of characters who've been built up for years but have yet to return. We already saw this for example in Egghead, where out of the blue, characters like Bonnie, Kuma and Lucci return to the story as major characters, after years of being on the sidelines. For all we know, Elbaf could finally be when the likes of Urok, Enel or even Shiki will finally make their comeback and play a major role in the post-time skip. These are also just the more anticipated returns, and as we just saw during Egghead, if even someone like Don Krieg can come back to the story, anything is possible in the final saga. Considering how unpredictable the story is, even the likes of Arlong or Captain Kuro could finally make a return in this arc for the first time since East Blue. And while these kinds of returning characters will likely be very important during Elbaf, like they've been in every other post-time skip arc, one thing that is for certain is that we will also be introduced to a horde of new characters in this arc. This is something that happens in literally every One Piece arc, but in particular, arcs like Elbaf that introduce a whole new nation and culture tend to introduce most new characters. Just take arcs like Skypiea and Wano as examples. Like Elbaf, both arcs were set in countries completely different from anywhere else in the One Piece world. And both arcs also ended up introducing literally dozens of new characters to the story. This process has already started in the first few chapters of Elbaf, where we've already met the likes of Loki and Rodo. We're also already flirting with new mysterious characters, such as whoever this figure with the straw hat is. Another thing about islands like Skypiea and Wano that the Straw Hats have visited is not just that we meet a lot of new characters, but that we also learn about characters who aren't even alive in the present story. Arcs like Elbaf that introduce a whole new nation are always accompanied by a big flashback, where we learn about the nation's history and about those who came before. Elbaf has arguably already started setting up its big flashback, where we've learned that Loki had a short reign of terror in Elbaf over 6 years ago, where he supposedly did a whole manner of evil acts, including killing his own father, the previous king. If past arcs are any indication, Elbaf's flashback alone may require a whole volume just to itself, as flashbacks are another aspect of the story that have only grown longer and longer with time. Now, granted, the arguments made in this video so far do make Elbaf sound like a long arc, but something that would still be within the scope of arcs like Skypiea and Dressrosa. However, I think the thing that will push Elbaf to be the longest arc in the manga is not only what will happen in the Land of the Giants, but all the characters and storylines we also have to follow outside the island. Now that the trend has been set by Egghead, the final saga will likely continue with us panning to events outside the Straw Hats, and following storylines that are happening all over the world. To give a quick recap, these are all the storylines that are currently happening outside Elbaf. The Revolutionary Army has just learned about Imu, and Dragon plans on ending things with the government before they sink the world. Because of the Revolutionary Army's actions, the Holy Land and the Celestial Dragons are currently being starved of food. The Blackbeard pirates are fighting virtually everyone, and have recently captured both Garp and Pudding. Blackbeard has also acquired Karibo, who knows that ancient weapon Poseidon is on Fishman Island, and that Pluton is in Wano. Shanks is finally making his move for the One Piece, and is heading for someplace outside Elbaf. Buggy has forced the Cross Guild to go hunt down the One Piece. The entire world saw Vegapunk's broadcast, and now knows both about the Ancient Kingdom and that the world may sink. Imu has just killed Saturn, and has made Figarland Garling a new member of the Five Elders. There is a mysterious man marked by flames somewhere in the world, and he is in possession of the four-growth Poneglyph that you need to reach Laugh-Tale. Vivi and Wapol are under the protection of Big News Morgans, and Vivi is trying to contact the Straw Hats. Weevil has been captured by the government, and Miss Bucking has asked Marco to help get him back. The surviving Vegapunks have combined to a new body, have moved to the skies and are contacting the other sky islands. Boa Hancock wants to leave Amazon Lily and possibly reunite with Luffy, now that the government is hunting her down. Perona has just helped free Moria from Pirate Island during Garp's attack, and their status is currently unknown. Judge and Caesar Clown have teamed up and formed an organization called Neo-Mats. Kid Law and Bartolomeo's pirate crews have all been taken down by the Yonko, and we do not know what became of them. Among the Marines, Fujitora and Smoker are both moving in unknown directions, and Kobe has declared that he is going to stop Luffy. And the thing is, these aren't actually the only non-Elbaf subplots that are currently going on, but only the subplots that we got updated on during the Egghead arc. For a full list of ongoing One Piece subplots, you would have to include parts of the story we haven't heard about in years, such as Enel on the moon, what happened to Big Mom's ship after Wano, and what is going on with the other Grand Fleet captains of Cavendish, Hideo, and Orlumbus. Maybe even someone like Bellamy still has a role to play, though I'm not too sure about that, since he seems to have fully committed to the life of being an artist. Wait a second, that's actually not a pirate flag Bellamy is drawing, it's the like button for this video. Thank you very much, Bellamy, for reminding the people to click it since they've made it so far into the video. Many of these subplots could actually end up taking a huge chunk of the Elbaf arc. Egghead was already an arc where we dedicated several chapters outside the Straw Hats to us for the first time seeing characters like Garp and Shanks in action. If Dragon is actually serious about him deciding to end things with the world government, it is possible that during Elbaf, we will witness something like an all-out war between the Revolutionary Army and the Celestial Dragons. It could also be that Blackbeard, after hearing Karibo's information, will immediately decide to invade Wano or Fishman Island, or maybe even both countries at the same time. And considering how many characters who were at God Valley 38 years ago are currently getting the limelight, it could be that Elbaf will also be when we will see the full flashback of the incident. And considering that Oda in interviews has talked about a long-anticipated fight between two characters happening very soon, it could also be that something as big as Shanks vs Blackbeard will also end up happening in the first few dozen chapters of Elbaf. And to finally overwhelm you completely with how many characters and plotlines could play a role in the Elbaf arc, there is nothing stopping new storylines from emerging all over the world. For example, there was literally zero setup for Garp invading Pirate Island before the Egghead arc, and it was simply an event that came completely out of left field. For all we know, something like the formation of Neo-Mats could end up being a seed that will end up blossoming into a subplot just as big as Pirate Island was during Egghead. Or, just like how characters like Garp suddenly took action during Egghead, maybe someone like Kong will out of nowhere become a major player during Elbaf. We simply have no idea. All the subplots that are going on outside Elbaf also present the Elbaf arc with another challenge that will likely make it the longest arc in the story, which is pacing. Because there are so many events that have to progress outside Elbaf, Elbaf can't simply be like most One Piece arcs, where the Straw Hats only spend a day or two at the island. Characters outside Elbaf will have to keep moving from one location to another, and some events will have to take time to transpire. For example, let's say that the revolutionaries are actually going to move against the world government in this arc. Or let's say that Blackbeard actually heeds Karibo's information and heads for either Poseidon or Pluton. It is going to take at the minimum days within the story for all this necessary travel to happen. Another reason why time has to pass within the story is that many of the major characters actually fought during the Egghead arc, which only happened 1 or 2 days ago in the story. If characters like Kid Law, Aokiji, Blackbeard and others are going to have other big fights during Elbaf, they will need to recover and heal their wounds from their last fights. Because of these factors, it is far more likely that Elbaf will be an arc like Wano, where it will not happen over the course of a few days, but a few weeks for the story to work. This could also be why the story is also teasing us with the quote about Elbaf not being a place where anyone should linger for too long, where Oda and his team already fully know that this arc is going to take potentially weeks within the story, which could mean literal years in the real world. With Elbaf having this ginormous amount of setup for it, you might expect it to at the very least be a fast-moving arc like Egghead, where the story involving the Straw Hats will actually happen very fast, because the manga has to juggle so many subplots outside the crew. This is, however, where we come to another huge reason why Elbaf will very likely end up being a longer arc than even Wano. The manga so far is actually taking its time with Elbaf. We are now 6 chapters into the Elbaf arc, and it has actually been a very slow-moving arc so far. The first 3 chapters of the arc are focused solely on the first 6 Straw Hats having a side quest in Rodo's house, without us focusing on any other parts of the story. What is also very noteworthy is that we haven't actually been introduced to any wholly new characters on Elbaf. So far, all the Elbaf characters present in the arc are characters who have either been mentioned or appeared in prior arcs. This is actually something completely unprecedented. For example, when the Straw Hats had spent 6 chapters on Dressrosa, we'd already been introduced to Rebecca, Kuros, Fujitora, most of the Colosseum fighters, and almost all of the Don Quixote family, and a whole bunch of other new characters as well. Dressrosa ended up being 100 chapters long, yet during the first 6 chapters, we had already been introduced to almost all of the major characters, we knew who the main villain was, and the plot was already well underway. With Elbaf, however, we've really only scratched the surface of the arc in the first 6 chapters, and still have no real idea what this arc is even going to be about. Elbaf's beginning is actually far more reminiscent of pre-time skip arcs, where the focus is a lot more on the Straw Hats slowly exploring a new setting. This is more than likely a deliberate decision from the story. There have been several allusions to pre-time skip One Piece in Elbaf's beginning, with for example Luffy's group being split to include just the first 6 Straw Hats, the monster trio doing the same style combination attack as in Alabasta, or Robin returning to her pre-time skip hairstyle. I think this could all be done to set the tone for the arc, where Elbaf could be very reminiscent of pre-time skip arcs, and give a lot of focus to the Straw Hats and the crew dynamic. This would be a stark contrast to most post-time skip arcs, where for example in Egghead, the crew was almost completely neglected in favor of focusing on the Vegapunks and the world's affairs. As Elbaf is likely the last very distinct nation the crew will visit in the story, the decision to make it a more traditional One Piece adventure reminiscent of arcs that took place in the first half of the Grand Line arguably makes a lot of sense. Wouldn't this, however, contradict the idea of this entire video? If Elbaf is actually going to be centered on the Straw Hats like the pre-time skip arcs, wouldn't this mean that it is then not going to be this mega arc like Wano, focused on so many other characters and the world? I genuinely think the story is actually trying to do both during Elbaf. At this point, there's no turning the ship around. For the story to work at all, the manga will have to focus on the several other subplots that are going on at the moment during the Elbaf arc. Yet, even with the One Piece world currently on fire, we are still dedicating entire chapters to just following the Straw Hats doing side quests. I think the most likely explanation of this is that Eiichiro Oda is genuinely ambitious enough that he plans for Elbaf to not only be a world-building heavy arc like Wano, a traditional adventure arc like Alabasta, but also an arc where the main story will progress all over the world like Egghead. A final point about why Elbaf will very likely be the biggest arc in the story is simply that this is literally the biggest location the Straw Hats have ever been to. Elbaf is absolutely enormous. Just one of the Giant's houses is already larger then the locations that have served as settings for entire arcs in the past. And there are literally dozens of these houses, in just one village on one of Elbaf's 3 massive levels. Just to put this into perspective, in the image we see of the Elbaf town in chapter 1132, every house by itself could be the size of, or even larger than something like Usopp's home island. This means that Elbaf is not only the largest place the Straw Hats have ever been to, it absolutely dwarfs the competition. If the tone set by the first few chapters of the arc tells us what kind of an arc this is going to be, the story might genuinely focus dozens of upcoming chapters just on the Straw Hat crew exploring Elbaf, and all the details in the land of the giants. There could be entire mini arcs simply focused on the crew being in one house at one time, which might sound ridiculous, but is actually something that has already happened. Essentially, there are 5 main arguments to this video's prediction about why Elbaf will likely be the longest arc in all of One Piece. One is that Elbaf will likely be an arc extremely rich in exploring the lore and history of the One Piece world, whether this be about Sun God Nika, the Void Century, or Elbaf's very own history. 2 is that the arc is being set up to focus on a huge number of characters, whether this be entirely new characters or returning characters whom we haven't seen in years. 3 is that Elbaf will likely continue the final saga trend of focusing on events all over the world, and these events could be even more massive than during Egghead. 4 is that Elbaf is by itself absolutely massive, and by far the biggest singular setting the Straw Hats have ever been to. And the 5th point is that if the first chapters of Elbaf are any indication, the arc will try to do all of the 4 other points, while also being a slow adventurous arc focused on the Straw Hats, like the ones we got in the pre-time skip. Now that I'm finally done breaking down all the reasons why Elbaf is set up to be jam-packed with content, I think I should try to answer one really important question. Are any of these expectations actually realistic? If Elbaf is going to be a longer arc than even Wano, it would literally mean that we'll spend more than half a decade in this one arc. With Eiichiro Oda's recent health scares, does it make any sense for him to spend years and years in Elbaf when he's just about to reach the end of his story? Personally, I think it is actually very reasonable to think that the plan is for Elbaf to be a huge arc, simply because of the fact that we are dealing with a completely unreasonable author. Eiichiro Oda has already dedicated his entire adult life to writing and drawing One Piece, and through the years, his arcs have only grown longer and longer on average. Take for example the Wano Country arc. A lot of readers would have probably thought that you were crazy if you in 2018 said that the arc was going to take 5 years and 149 chapters before it was over, as well as all the monumental events that happened within this one arc. Yet, this is exactly what ended up happening. If Elbaf ended up being an arc that's over 200 chapters long, this would genuinely be nothing too new for the story. While it might be the longest singular stretch of the story with the Straw Hats in one location, this is only one way of looking at the manga. Let's for example compare it to the 200 chapter stretch of Fishman Island, Punk Hazard, and Dressrosa. Arguably, not that much happened within these chapters to move forward the main story of the manga. I'd even argue that Egghead alone is more important to the main story than these 3 arcs combined. Yet, Oda still committed to writing Fishman Island, Punk Hazard, and Dressrosa in this way, despite knowing how much material he still had left for the story. Oda has simply always been an author who's willing to delay and slow down the story if it suits him. This is sometimes even very abrupt, where for example at the beginning of 2017, Oda said that the Wano arc would start that year. Yet, Oda during that same year ended up extending Whole Cake Island to a point where Wano's beginning was delayed to July of 2018. In other words, Oda in 2017 on very short notice decided to extend his manga by at least 20 more chapters. While you could argue that the story's pacing is ramping up now that we're in the final saga, I do not think this is necessarily true. Elbaf's first chapters alone are the slowest pace the story has been for years. If there's also going to be an arc in the story that Oda is going to keep extending on a whim, it is probably going to be Elbaf. As said at the start, Elbaf has been built up for 25 years, and it is very much possible that some of the longest build-up moments in the story, such as us seeing Dragon in action or Pluton being awakened, will happen during this arc. There is, however, another, more personal reason why Oda will keep dedicating more and more chapters to Elbaf. It's possible that one of the reasons why Wano Country took so long was that Oda wanted to fully explore the One Piece island he based on his home country of Japan. This same effect could happen with Elbaf and the Giants, which are based on Norse Vikings. While Oda isn't Scandinavian, Vikings are still very dear to him, as One Piece was originally inspired by an animated show called Wiki the Viking. While the One Piece world is seemingly mainly inspired by the real-world golden age of piracy, this Viking influence is still seen heavily throughout the story, and is even something present all the way in Chapter 1. In fact, Oda loves Vikings so much that in the second volume of One Piece, he dedicates multiple pages outside the chapters to just talking about Vikings and why he finds them fascinating. In over 2 decades since this, Oda has also made a point to draw Luffy and the Straw Hats in the style of Vikings as often as he's had the chance. Basically, beyond all the story points brought up in this video, Elbaf might just become the longest arc in this story, just because Oda can't help himself. Throughout One Piece's serialization, Oda has had numerous health scares, dropping manga sales, and unfulfilled deadlines. Yet he's consistently decided to extend the series despite these concerns. Oda himself has admitted that he cannot realistically fit everything he wants to include in the manga, but based on the last 27 years, this is not for a lack of trying. Admittedly, this is also not just how Oda thinks, but is simply how mangaka of long-running series operate. There are far longer manga out there than even One Piece, and Oda at 49 is still relatively young, compared to some of his colleagues working till their 70s or even 80s. In short, Oda is a complete workaholic, like most people in his position are, and there's not much evidence for this stopping. Even after his most recent emergency break, Oda gave a note in the latest chapter that he's sorry and that he will only redouble his efforts. What there is, however, a ton of evidence for is how much Oda values the Elbaf arc, very likely more than any prior arc in the story, and genuinely, the arc could become longer than even the most generous estimates in this video. I talked a lot in this video about the many One Piece subplots that are currently going on outside Elbaf. One of these involves Vivi, who is currently trying to contact the Straw Hats. If you're interested, you should click here to watch my other video on why possibly during Elbaf, Vivi is set to become the final member of the Straw Hat Pirates, and why this is something that has already been guaranteed years ago by Oda himself. Thanks a lot for watching this video to the end.